Hello, coming to you from the delicious land of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Bryce the Chef Journey. Tied in with the popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we played that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 28. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Deep Space D6 out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off both Priests of Ra and British Rails. On the reaction segment, I'll discuss one of my Kickstarter pet peeves. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Cryptid. On the Obscure Bryce Game segment, I review Dino Builder. And we wrap up the episode by reviewing my top 10 new-to-me games from 2018 not published in 2018.
Oh gosh, I'm a sad, reflecting up on the air of flexing.
I had a chance to bring Deep Space D6 out of the dust when I finally got the Kickstarter expansion in the mail recently. Deep Space D6 is a solitaire-only dice placement game from designer Tony Go. I last played the game 1 year, 2 months, and 22 days ago. I feel bad for the designer because everything that could have gone wrong with the Deep Space D6 expansion Kickstarter did go wrong. It became almost comical as what should have been a very simple production of just a small box of cards became a tangled web of disaster that resulted in a campaign that fulfilled an entire year later than originally estimated. But anyway, I had been waiting for the expansion to arrive before breaking the game out again. I recalled it being a brutally difficult game and wondered how the expansion would impact it. Well, it's still brutally difficult. When I started writing the script for this episode, I still hadn't beaten the game, but I finally did just a few days ago using the drone chip. Those drones were super useful in finally getting through the enemy deck. The boss usually does me in, if I even make it that far. But I got him this time. Despite finally beating the game, I plan on continuing to play it in the near future. I still have another ship to try out, and I want to play through the base game again with all the ships, too. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Eric Barosius, username Eric Barosius, brought a couple of interesting games out of the dust. First up is Reiner Knizia's Priests of Ra, published in 2009 by Rio Grande Games. Eric last played it 8 years, 10 months, and 30 days ago, and currently rates it a 5 out of 10. He writes, I played this redevelopment of Ra back when it was new. At the time, I thought it was a reasonable game, but not as good as the original, because the risk-taking is less tense. A friend brought his copy to our house con last week, and I played it again after nearly 9 years. This time I was more aware of the extra play time required to make decisions about flipping tiles over to the other side, and of the reduction in risk-taking. It's easy to say that what you want in a game is as many decisions as possible. I like decisions. I even say that my favorite game mechanism is the decision. But wanting as many decisions as possible in your games is like wanting as many calories as possible in your meals. What I want is the right decisions, no more and no less. I dropped my rating by 2 whole points after this second play. That's an unusually big drop for me. Next up is British Rails, which Eric last played 6 years and 20 days ago, and currently rates a 6 out of 10. This is a Mayfair train game first published way back in 1984. Eric writes, I was introduced to the Crayon Rails family by Bruce Lindsay, who attended last week's HouseCon. One of Bruce's favorite games in the series is British Rails. One morning, there were just 2 of us ready for a game, and Bruce suggested that we play this. I have generally avoided it because I perceive that there's an optimal route that you would like to build. Of course, you must look at your cards, but if you can build track while delivering your first contracts that will be likely to be useful later on, you'll have a big advantage. Your Rails has this feature to some extent with the line to Iberia, but British Rails has a much more strong line. A line from London to Birmingham, Manchester, Lancaster, and up the west coast to Glasgow is a great backbone. Well, in our game, I got the cards to start with much of that line. I built Birmingham, Liverpool, Lancaster, Stranraer, and Ayr, and I ran away with the game. Oddly enough, I never connected Manchester, despite having a line that ran just west of it. Thanks for the contribution, Eric. I actually like both of these games quite a bit, though my next plays of each of them will also be dusty ones. Reaction segment time. I thought it'd be fun to take some time this episode to tell you about one of my Kickstarter pet peeves. Creators who cancel their project's campaign prematurely. It's a new year, and yet this is already happening. One particular project caught my eye early in the year, a game called Brutus from the designer of Tramways. That kind of pedigree piqued my interest, and I started the project to follow along and potentially back later. I rarely back a project right away, and instead prefer to take my time analyzing a project, evaluating it for red flags, and seeing if it checks my positive Kickstarter boxes. Brutus launched on the first day of the year, and was, in fact, the first project to be launched in 2019. And then 3 days later, it became the first project of the year to be cancelled. Why? Because the project wasn't earning money as quickly as the creator had hoped. And this is invariably the reason cited for such premature cancellations. These cancellations happen even if the project is on track to fund, just not as quickly or with as much surplus pledges as hoped for. Brutus, in fact, had already earned a third of its funding goal in just a few days, and probably would have funded quite comfortably. And yet, this is a model that too many project creators have adopted. If a project doesn't seem to be as hyped as desired, they throw in the towel, quit, give up, and cancel the project with promises to relaunch in the near future with new exciting stretch goals, new videos, and usually a smaller funding goal to give the illusion of the game meeting a funding goal more quickly. But nothing has really changed with the game itself. Project creators are afraid of failure, and they're afraid to learn from failure. They'd rather blame a slow campaign on the campaign itself, its appearance or marketing or something like that, rather than consider there might be a problem with the game itself. I, for one, have much more respect for a project that genuinely tried to fund, stuck it out for the whole funding period, and gave it an honest try, than for a project that canceled prematurely and tried to mask their failure with manipulation. Project creators that give the funding period its entire time span to try to work seem to be more willing to go back to the drawing board, rework the game itself, and launch again later in the future with a better project. This is in stark contrast to the typical cancellation that launches again in a short time later with only an improved marketing gimmick instead of an improved product. Let's compare the campaign of Brutus to a campaign of a game called Native Wars. This was a campaign on Kickstarter a couple of years ago. It caught my eye because of the beautiful art and the American Indian theme, which is underrepresented in board games, but very interesting to me. The campaign had a modest funding goal and pulled in steady funds, including my own, but failed to fully fund by the end of the campaign. But the creator did not quit, and when he pledged to relaunch at the conclusion of the campaign, he pledged to do so only after re-evaluating the game and making sure it was the best it could be. It still hasn't relaunched, but if it ever does, I will back it again because of the clear commitment the designer has to the game itself instead of just to the campaign. The same cannot be said for Brutus. That campaign is tainted to me now. It will probably relaunch soon, and when it does, it will be with no significant changes to the game itself, only a new coat of paint on the exterior campaign. That doesn't impress me. But maybe I'm in the minority on that. What do you think about campaigns that prematurely cancel? On the What I Have Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about the hot new deduction game, Cryptid, a recent release from publisher Osprey Games and designers Hal Duncan and Ruth Viviers. Here's how it works. Players are cryptozoologists trying to locate a fantastic creature on a map before other players do. Players begin a game by assembling a map from modular tiles according to the layout pictured on one of the cards from a huge deck of setup cards. On the backside of each of these cards is a number that corresponds to a rule listed in one of the colored player aids players receive. These rules represent one piece of information on the location of the creature being tracked. Something like, in a desert or mountain, within 1 hex of a swamp, within 2 hexes of cougar territory, or within 3 hexes of a standing stone monument. Between each of the player's clues, there will be only one single hex somewhere on the map for which all of the rules hold true. On their turn, a player will try to figure out which hex this may or may not be by placing a marker on the hex and asking one of the players if the hex matches their rule. If it does, that player marks it with a disc. If not, they mark it with a cube. Players will use all the players' compiled yes or no answers to try to deduce where the correct hex is, and on a future turn, they can make a guess instead of ask a question. If everyone answers yes to the guess, the player wins. I don't usually care for deduction games. They often seem tedious or gimmicky to me, but this is one of the good ones. It offers a pure deduction experience with no silly distractions and creates an experience that is perfectly balanced between how much information is gained at a time, the satisfying challenge of the deduction, and the overall amount of time a game takes. I've actually willingly returned to the game several times since initially learning it. Very rare for me where deduction games are concerned. And I have to give props to the math required to create a huge deck of setup cards that managed to combine a completely unique arrangement of terrain with 4 different clues taken from a huge menu of clues, and combine both these elements so that only one hex matches all of the clues in any given game. I find this a very impressive design feat indeed. Obscure Bryce Game segment time. On the segment this week, I'm going to tell you about a super obscure game my friend Kent got my family for Christmas called Dino Builders. This is a Ravensburger kids game from 1993 by an uncredited designer. It's literally a puzzle game as players race to be the first to assemble their own 3-dimensional dinosaur from puzzle pieces. There are only 2 people on BGG who have ever logged plays for this game, and I am one of them. Here's how it works. Each puzzle piece is assigned a number between 1 and 6. On a player's turn, they roll a d6 and take the corresponding puzzle piece if they haven't claimed it already. If they have, they just pass the die to the next player. When a player has all 6 pieces, they try to assemble their dinosaur before the other players get all 6 of their pieces and assemble their dinosaur. So there's also a dexterity and real-time element in addition to the set collection and building element. It's a cute game and probably best enjoyed by younger children like my 4-year-old son Joseph, who demanded 4 games in a row of this so he could have a turn with each of the 4 dinosaurs included with the game. But it's also the type of game that older kids and parents aren't necessarily at an advantage at over the younger kids because of the way the mechanics play out, which is sometimes a tough thing to pull off in a children's game. But if needed, parents and older kids could easily handicap themselves in the assembling part of the game by using a blindfold, which is a very amusing variant. We continue my review of 2018 gaming this week with my top 10 new to me list. These are games that I learned in 2018 that weren't actually published in 2018, but they were still new to me, and I like to rank those games as well. Jumping right into it then, number 10, Near and Far. I'm a nostalgic fan of games that use a paragraph-based adventure system. There's something about them I find very charming. Near and Far combines that with the variability of multiple maps and set collection goodness. I'm having a great time playing through the campaign with my wife. Number 9, Charterstone. I played through the whole Charterstone campaign with my wife and had a blast with it. I particularly enjoyed the various minions in the game. My son got jealous of us playing and wanted to play the sticker game with us about halfway through the campaign, so we promised to get a recharge pack and play through the whole campaign with him in 2019. Number 8, Sagrada. I was expecting to like Sagrada because dice drafting usually works well for me, but I wasn't expecting this solo mode to be so good as well. This game has really worked well for my wife and I've come back to the challenge myself on the solo mode several times. Number 7, Keeper. I thought this game was very clever and I liked it better than Keyflower. The folding boards create some unique decision-making opportunities, and I like how timing is so important in the game. Number 6, Column of Fire. I think I like this game better than anyone I've actually played it with.